A very good evening to everyone. I would like to thank each one of you for joining us today for the first session in the series of 3 sessions with Dr. Rose on the general embryology as a subject. Before we start today's session and walk you through today's class, I would like to set out some housekeeping rules which all of us have to bear in mind to be able to gain maximum out of today's session. This session is being recorded, and a recorded version of this class will be circulated to everybody who is participating today. All of you are kept on mute, so if you want to ask any question in the course of this session, please feel free to write that question in the Q&A tab in the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Dr. Rose is going to take up all the questions for today's class. The questions which we are not able to answer today due to the permissible time limit, we will get back to you with the answers to those questions in the stipulated period of time. Please try to refrain from using chat because the questions which are posted in the chat will not be acknowledged or answered. So try to put all the questions, maximum questions in the Q&A tab only. You can also expect interesting polling time to time throughout the session that you can participate in. All of these polls are anonymous, so try to participate as much as you can. With this, I would like to invite my colleague, Ms. Priyanka Jain, who would be moderating today's session along with me. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Shruti. And once again, I would like to welcome you all in today's masterclass session on general embryology. Here, I am pleased to introduce to you our esteemed speaker of this session, Dr. Rose Xavier. Dr. Rose is an assistant professor in the Department of Anatomy at Government Medical College, Trichy, Kerala. She completed her graduation as well as post-graduation from the same institute. She has published more than 10 national and international scientific articles in various journals and is an editorial board member of the Journal of Society of Clinical Anatomists. She has won many awards for best paper and poster presentations, and recently she has been selected by NPTEL Swayamprabha Academic Channel under Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, to deliver video lectures on embryology. She also has a famous YouTube channel in the name Life in the Womb, Dr. Rose, where she features various videos explaining the different topics under embryology. She is here today with us to take you on a journey to revise embryology quickly. It is the first out of the 3 masterclass sessions in the series, and the topic for today is general embryology. So with this, I now hand it over to Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. First of all, a very good evening to everyone. So I would like to thank Mr. Arvind, Mr. Ayan, and Mr. Jija for giving me this wonderful opportunity to work with Elsevier, and of course the entire Elsevier team behind the scenes for making my dream come true. And for these masterclass series, I would like to thank Ms. Kritika, Ms. Shruti, and Ms. Priyanka for coordinating these sessions. With this, let me start today's session. Today's session, as you all know, is based on general embryology. And this is actually meant for students who have at least gone once through these general embryology topics. Because if you're viewing this session for the first time, you might find it difficult because we are actually trying to cover a bit more topics in this 1 hour frame. And before the exam, we usually go through the books, and usually you find it difficult to cover most of the topics the day before the exam. That is what we all find it difficult. So whenever you study anatomy, especially embryology, I always ask you, I will always prefer you to have a scribbling pad with you, and you just try to draw the diagrams which you are seeing, so that it will help you to memorize those topics very well. And again, a better way of revision is whenever you take one chapter, you try to catch up 3 or 4 images which will convey the entire concept of that chapter. So that again, the day before exam, you can just flip through the images to make your concepts clear. Because unless you go through all these concepts, it will be very difficult for you to write the exam in a fashion way. Okay, so that is the reason why I chose brushing through the images as a part of revision. So in this session, we'll be dealing with the following topics under general embryology. We'll be moving through gametogenesis, the female reproductive cycles, fertilization, then we'll be moving on to the first 3 weeks of development, and of course we'll be stressing some points which happen during 4th to 8th week of development. So with this, I'm starting the session. So we know that it is the primordial germ cells which are giving rise to the gametes. So where are these primordial germ cells located? You know that this is the yolk sac, right? So it is in the yolk sac, we have the primordial germ cells located, and they will be actually traveling to the indifferent gonad. What do you mean by indifferent gonad? The thing is, these primordial germ cells, in the absence of two factors, we call this as testis determining factor, and the other factor is known as Mullerian inhibiting factor. If these two factors are absent, by default, the primordial germ cells will be forming, or the gonads will be forming the ovary and the female genital system. But if these two factors are present, these indifferent gonads will be forming testis and male genital system. Now, before moving on to the gametogenesis, we will just rush through the important concepts behind mitosis and meiosis, because these are the two major types of cell divisions happening in the gametogenesis. So coming to mitosis first, what do you mean by mitosis? Mitosis, we know that the maternal cell just divides to form two genetically identical daughter cells by the duplication of DNA. That is what is meant by mitosis. We have two identical cells. There is no actually halving of the chromosome number. If you have 2n, then the daughter cells will be having the same diploid number. The diploid number will be maintained. Now, what do you mean by meiosis? So when we talk about meiosis, there are two steps in meiosis. It's not just one meiotic cell division. It happens in two steps. One is known as meiosis 1, and the other one is known as meiosis 2. So what are the main differences between meiosis 1 and meiosis 2? So in meiosis 1, we start with a cell with diploid number of chromosomes, and in the end what we get is a haploid set of chromosomes. Okay, so we have a haploid set of chromosomes at the end of meiosis 1. So we can call this as reduction division. Reduction of chromosomes happen in this first meiotic division. And what happens in the second meiotic division? In the second meiotic division, it is just like our mitosis, because we have the same haploid set of chromosomes as we get the daughter cells at the end of the second meiotic division. So what is the difference between these two, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2? The end product is N in meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So what is the main difference between meiosis 1 and meiosis 2? If you look at this cell, we can see that the chromosomes are paired. The haploid number is there, but the chromosomes are paired. But at the end of meiosis 2, we can see that the chromosomes are unpaired. So that is the main difference between meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And meiosis 1 is a reduction division where the diploid number is made into a haploid number, and meiosis 2 is just like the mitosis. Now we are moving on to gametogenesis. First we will see the oogenesis, then we will move on to spermatogenesis. So when we talk about oogenesis, what are the events occurring in oogenesis? So oogenesis starts with our oogonium, and oogonium will be converted into primary oocyte. So that is again by mitotic division. Now the primary oocyte will start its first meiotic division when the fetus is within the uterine cavity. That is one important thing you have to remember. So the meiotic division, the first meiotic division will start when the fetus is within the uterine cavity. But will the meiotic division be completed? No, the meiotic division won't be completed by the time the child is born. So at which stage this phase, this meiotic division is arrested? That is again a favorite question for most of the MCQs. So it is arrested in the prophase of first meiotic division. So when a baby is born, the ovary of the baby will be containing the primary oocytes arrested in the prophase of the first meiotic division. And this stage will be dormant, like during the childhood period, the ovary is inactive. And when the child moves to puberty, what happens is there will be ovarian cycles. You know, we'll be seeing the ovarian cycles and the menstrual cycles. So with every ovarian cycle, some of the oocytes will decide to become mature. Say 15 or 20 oocytes will start becoming mature oocytes. That is the time when this the first meiotic division is getting completed. And soon before ovulation, so after the first meiotic division, we get the secondary oocyte, and you have to remember the chromosome number. So this is the haploid number of chromosomes. We have seen that in mitosis. Mitosis means from oogonium to primary oocyte, there is no change in the chromosome number. From primary oocyte to secondary oocyte, we can see that this 2n is getting converted to n, that is meiosis 1, that is reduction division, we know that. And this secondary oocyte will enter into the second meiotic division. But again, so at the time of ovulation, what will be the condition of the oocyte? It will be secondary oocyte with haploid number of chromosomes, and the phase will be metaphase, the metaphase of second meiotic division. So the secondary oocytes will be arrested in metaphase of second meiotic division, and it will be actually sucked by the uterine tube into the uterus, isn't it? So when fertilization happens, when the sperm needs this oocyte, then only this metaphase will be completed. That is, the meiotic division, the second meiotic division will be completed only if fertilized by the sperm. That thing that you can remember it like. The first meiotic division will be arrested in the prophase, and the second meiotic division will be arrested in the metaphase. And this second meiotic division will be completed only if the secondary oocyte is fertilized by the sperm. If it is not fertilized by the sperm, the secondary oocyte won't be completing this second meiotic division, and it will just get degenerated. So with the formation of secondary oocyte, we can see there is one polar body released, and again, once the secondary oocyte completes its second meiotic division, we have the second polar body released. You have to keep that also in your mind. Then we know that there are oocytes. So simultaneously, these oocytes will be covered by follicles. You call these follicles as primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature follicle. And at the time of ovulation, we call this follicle as Graafian follicle. So Graafian follicle is the mature follicle with secondary oocyte, and it is this Graafian follicle which ruptures at the time of ovulation. So what do you mean by corpus luteum? We know that at the time of ovulation, the secondary oocyte is released along with some of the granulosa cells in the form of corona radiata. So the remaining part of the follicle, which is there in the ovary, you call it as corpus luteum. Now, the maturation of the ovarian follicle, this is again a schematic representation of the maturation of the ovarian follicle. We have seen the primordial follicle, we have the primary follicle, we have the secondary follicle, we have the early tertiary follicle, and this is our Graafian follicle. So for university exams, the important questions coming from this session are, you'll be asked to write a short note on oogenesis, you will be asked to draw a diagram of the Graafian follicle, and for MCQ purpose, you will be asked which are the stages at which the meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 are arrested. All these are favorite questions for the examiners. So this is a Graafian follicle. You should know the details of the Graafian follicle as well. We know that there is a secondary oocyte which is covered by zona pellucida. Then you have the cumulus oophorus, which is projecting into the antral cavity. This is the antral cavity. Then you have the granulosa cells. Outer to it, you have the theca interna, and then you have the theca externa. So when this ruptures during ovulation, we can see this is the ovulated ovum. So what all things you have? You have the oocyte, then you have the zona pellucida and corona radiata. And this ovulated ovum, when it is fertilized, then in the perivitelline space is a space between the white line membrane of the oocyte and the zona pellucida. There you will get the second polar body. So first polar body, soon after ovulation and soon after fertilization, you will get second polar body as well. And sometimes we can even see 3 polar bodies. So what is that condition? 3 polar bodies usually you get when this first polar body, which is released after the formation of secondary oocyte, is again further dividing during fertilization. Then in that case, you might get up to 3 polar bodies in the perivitelline space. So, Priyanka, let's have a question.
Yes. So we are going to flash a polling question on your screen. Please participate as much as you can, and I will launch the poll now. Here is the question. Hope you can see this question on your screen. You have 30 seconds time to answer the question. These polls are anonymous, so try to answer as much as you can. Five more seconds left. Here are the results of the polling. So Dr. Rose, this is what we have got.
That was a really very good response, and I think we are having a more studious group right now. Thank you, Priyanka. Let's move on with the session.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming to spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis, we know it is the formation of the entire spermatogenesis. You can just split it into two: spermatogenesis proper and spermiogenesis. So what happens is we have the spermatogonia, from which you have the spermatids formed, and these spermatids will be undergoing a morphological change so that we have more number of spermatozoa. So let's see. This is the seminiferous tubule, which is seen in the testis, cross-section of seminiferous tubule. Then these cells are known as Sertoli cells. Can you make out the Sertoli cells? So Sertoli cell, the peculiarity of Sertoli cell is they have lateral pockets where you have the arrangement of the different stages of spermatogenesis. So let's start with spermatogonia. They are the germ cells. And there are mainly two types of spermatogonia, type A and type B. And it is the type B spermatogonia which is giving rise to the primary spermatocyte. So there are primary spermatocyte, and it will be mitotic division without any change number of chromosomes. This primary spermatocyte, it is more or less same as that of the oogenesis. There will be first meiotic division, and it will give rise to secondary spermatocyte. The important difference between the spermatogenesis and oogenesis is that the primary spermatocyte gives rise to two secondary spermatocytes. That point you have to remember. Now we have a haploid set of chromosomes. Then again, it will undergo the second meiotic division to form 4 spermatids. Okay, so that again, there is a major difference between oogenesis and spermatogenesis. In oogenesis, after the second meiotic division, what we are having is there is only one secondary oocyte which has completed the second meiotic division, right? But here we get 4 spermatids. And further, what spermatids without any cell division will just undergo a morphological rearrangement to form the spermatozoa. So this is a tableau which will help just summarize the entire event. So just the day before the exam, if you just have a look at this table, the entire spermatogenesis is over for you within seconds. This is spermatogonium type, which is giving rise to primary spermatocyte. See the 2n is maintained here. So what is this 4C? This is chromosomal duplication. You have the 4 chromosomes. That is what is meant by 4C, or sometimes it will be represented as capital N. So sometimes in the diagrams, if you see 4N, please don't confuse it with the tetraploid state. It is just the duplication just before cell division. Now the primary spermatocyte will undergo the first meiotic division, and it will give rise to secondary spermatocyte. There, the reduction division has happened, and the haploid number you get. And after that, it again undergo the second meiotic division. There you get 4 spermatids. Again, the haploid number is maintained, but then it will be unpaired. The chromosomes are not paired, it is unpaired. Then after that, you have the spermiogenesis happening, which will give rise to 4 spermatozoa. And the chromosome number will be maintained as haploid. So these are the series of events which occur during spermatogenesis. And during spermiogenesis, we have already mentioned that there are no cell division as such happening for the spermatids. It is just morphological rearrangement because spermatid is a cell with cell organelles. So they will undergo some morphological rearrangement so that it will be converted to a functional sperm. So let's see what are the organelles getting converted. We know there is a Golgi apparatus for the spermatid that will be converted into the acrosome cap, the cap over the head of the sperm. Then you have the nucleus of the spermatid that will be actually getting converted as the head of the sperm. Then here you have a centrosome which is splitting into two centrioles, the proximal and distal centriole. So the proximal centriole will be forming the axial filament at the neck, and the distal centriole will be forming the annulus. Now what happens to the axial filament is it will extend from the proximal centriole to the distal centriole position, that is the annulus, and it will be covered by a mitochondrial sheath. Then you call it as middle piece of the sperm. And further downwards, after the annulus, the axial filament will be becoming the principal piece and the end piece of the spermatozoa. So these are the morphological changes happening in the spermiogenesis. Now let's see about the ovarian cycle. So till now we discussed about the gametogenesis under the headings oogenesis and spermatogenesis. Now we have the ovarian cycle. We have two phases for the ovarian cycle. One is known as follicular phase and the other one is known as luteal phase. Follicular phase means we have the development of the follicles, and the follicle will mature to form the Graafian follicle just before ovulation. And what do you mean by luteal phase? It is a formation of corpus luteum. Now this is actually having a synchrony with the menstrual cycle. So how is it? So during follicular phase, the follicles will secrete estrogen, and during the luteal phase, the corpus luteum will secrete mainly progesterone along with estrogen. So what are the effects of these in the menstrual cycle? The estrogen will result in the proliferative phase of the menstrual cycle, and progesterone will result in the secretory phase of the menstrual cycle. So again, for university exams, I have seen questions like how this ovarian cycle and menstrual cycle is maintaining a synchrony. So the follicular phase and luteal phase will actually influence, have got an influence in the endometrium through the hormones estrogen and progesterone in maintaining the menstrual cycle. So let's see the hormonal control at a quick glance. So we have the hypothalamus, we have the gonadotropin releasing hormones which are acting on the pituitary. So mainly it is the adenohypophysis. And there are mainly two hormones released by the pituitary. One is FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. The other one is LH, luteinizing hormone. And they will be acting on the ovary. So follicle stimulating hormone, from the word itself, we know what is it doing. So it will stimulate the growth of follicles. And luteinizing hormone, it will result in the ovulation. So the follicles will actually release estrogen, and that will result in the proliferative phase of the uterine endometrium, and the progesterone released by the corpus luteum will result in the secretory phase of the endometrium. So this is about the hormonal control in a nutshell. So if you are just viewing this diagram, say within 30 seconds, you can just make a quick recap of the entire hormonal control of the ovarian cycle as well as menstrual cycle. So from this diagram, we can see at visual point, we are having the peaks of FSH and LH. So we can see that just this is the point of ovulation, right? This is a follicular phase and this is a luteal phase. So in the middle, say roughly 14th day after the first menstrual day, you get the ovulation happening. So there are two peaks just before ovulation, that is the peak for FSH and peak for LH. So it is the LH surge which results in ovulation. Simultaneously, you can see the levels of estrogen as well. We can see the peaking of estrogen just before ovulation and the peaking of progesterone after ovulation, because the corpus luteum is responsible for the release of progesterone. But when we have a look at these two, we can see that estrogen is also peaking at the second half of menstrual cycle as well. So what is it due to? Because we have the corpus luteum secreting both estrogen and progesterone, but progesterone is the main hormone which is secreted by corpus luteum. Now, so we know that we have finished the gametogenesis. Now we have an idea about the ovarian cycle and menstrual cycle. Now we are moving on to the fertilization part. So fertilization part, what are the major events happening in the fertilization part? First, we need to bring the gametes to the fertilization site. Then there will be fusion of gametes, then effects of fertilization. So these are the major events happening during fertilization. So the first thing is we have the sperm and we have the ovum in the ampoule of the uterine tube. So there are maybe 3 hurdles for the sperm to penetrate in order to fertilize the ovum. So what are the 3 main hurdles? The first one is corona radiata. So these are the cells which are arranged around the oocyte. You can see it. Okay, so these are the corona radiata cells. So the sperm has to penetrate the corona radiata cells. Then you have the zona pellucida. Then you have the white line membrane of the secondary oocyte. So these are the 3 main hurdles the sperm has to cross in order to fertilize the oocyte. So what are the changes happening for the sperm in order to make it ready for the fertilization? So these 2 changes, we call it as capacitation and acrosome reaction. So capacitation can be asked as a short note. Acrosome reaction can be asked as a short note. They are very, very favorite questions for the examiners. So for the acrosome reaction, we have the acrosomal cap releasing the 2 chemicals, hyaluronidase and acid phosphatase. So again, if you add the points, the chemicals disintegrating the barriers, in this way, you can fetch more marks. Like what is a chemical helping in the disintegration of the corona radiata? That is hyaluronidase. And for zona pellucida, we have acrosin, and for white line membrane, we have the integrin peptides. Now let's see what are the results of fertilization. So soon after the sperm enters the oocyte, the female gamete is actually waiting to complete its second meiotic division, isn't it? So soon after the sperm enters the oocyte, the female gamete will complete its second meiotic division. That's the first thing which we'll be seeing. Then what happens? Have ovum with the second polar body. This is the peri-white line space. We already have the first polar body here. So soon after it completes its second meiotic division, we have the second polar body in the peri-white line space. And some books even say this first polar body may again divide into 2 polar bodies simultaneously with the secondary oocyte completing its second meiotic division. So ultimately, sometimes you might get one more additional polar body in the perivitelline space. Then what happens? There will be formation of the female pronucleus, and the chromosome number will be 22 plus X. It will be always 22 plus X. So what happens to the head of the sperm? The head of the sperm will be incorporated here as the male pronucleus. And what about its chromosomal type? It can be either 22 plus X or 22 plus Y. And the fused zygote will undergo cleavage divisions. So sometimes there will be issues with carrying the sperm to the site of the uterine tube, or some issues with the uterine tube as well, some issues with the uterine cavity. So in these conditions, a couple won't be able to give birth to their young ones. In those cases, we opt for a method known as in vitro fertilization. So in vitro fertilization, through in vitro fertilization, what we usually do is we collect the sperm from the donor, we collect the oocyte from the donor, and in the laboratory setting, we fertilize them. And once the fertilization is over, we actually wait for the blastocyst formation. And once the blastocysts are formed, we implant it back to the uterine cavity. So this is an artificial method of fertilization. So sometimes suffering from defective sperm motility or some issues with the sperms, the count, sperm count, all those conditions, they won't be in a position to fertilize. So in these conditions, we'll collect the sperm from the male donor, and we will make this fertilization happen in artificial settings. So Priyanka, shall we have the next question?
Yeah, so next question will appear your screen for 30 seconds now. Here it is. 5 seconds left. Here are the results, Dr. Rose.
Very good response again. Actually, this question, I haven't mentioned it till now. I mean, the answer we will be seeing in the coming slides. Anyway, most of you know the answer, so we'll be explaining it in the coming slides. So, zona pellucida covers which all structures? That was our question. So, before moving on to this and the answer of this question, we'll see some of the important things before that. Gestational period. How will you calculate the gestational period? We have the zygote and we have the baby born. The gap between the formation of zygote and the birth of the child is calculated as 266 days or 38 weeks. But if you are calculating it from the first day of the last menstrual period, then it will account to 80 days or 40 weeks. Why is this disparity? Have you ever thought about that? Because you know that if you calculate this as day 1 of the menstrual period, roughly about 14th day, we have the ovulation, isn't it? So at the time of ovulation, if we have the sperm here, we have the fertilization and we have the zygote. If you are calculating from day 1, this is roughly 2 weeks, isn't it? So if we actually add 2 weeks to this period, then you will get 280 days or 40 weeks. So if you are calculating it will be 40 weeks, fertilization, it will be 38 weeks. That is the reason for disparity between the two calculations of gestation period. Now, how we are going to divide the period between the point of fertilization and till the baby is born. So it can be broadly divided into 2 periods. This is known as the embryonic period. From point of fertilization after fertilization. So that is the embryonic period. And after 8 weeks, we call the conceptus as fetus. So always keep this point in mind. When will you call a conceptus as an embryo, or when will you call it as a fetus? Because most of us go wrong in calling a conceptus as fetus and embryo, right? So only after 8 weeks, you call the conceptus within the uterine cavity as fetus. And before 8 weeks, it is further divided into the initial 3 weeks, which is known as the germinal period, and it is from 4 to 8 weeks we actually call the conceptus as embryo proper. Okay, so why you call the first 3 weeks as germinal period? Because it is during this period that we have the 3 germ layers developed, and after that we have the proper development of embryo. So that is how the embryonic period is further divided. So germinal period means the first 3 weeks where we have the 3 germ layers developed. So we now have the fertilized ovum. Now, what are the events happening to the fertilized ovum? So from the point of fertilization till it gets implanted within the uterine cavity, these series of events, we call it as events occurring during the first week of intrauterine period. That these are the events which are going to happen during the first week of intrauterine period. I would like to add one more thing. In this session, I'm not planning to talk about placenta, because when I talk about placenta along with this, you might feel it confusing. So I'm planning to do it in the 3rd session so that we can discuss placenta in one go, so that it will be easy for you to understand. So since I'm not discussing about placenta right now, it doesn't mean that placenta is not getting developed during this period. Okay. So what are the chief events happening during the first week of intrauterine period? We know that there is a fertilization happening in the ampulla. Then you have the formation of zygote. Then series of cleavage divisions happen. It moves from the 2-cell stage to 4-cell, then 8-cell, and so on. And we have the formation of morula. We have the formation of blastocyst. And it is the blastocyst which gets implanted within the uterine cavity. So this is the event. These are the series of events happening during the first week of intrauterine period. So again, you will get questions like, what do you mean by morula? What do you mean by blastocyst? What do you mean by cleavage divisions? These are some of the favorite questions for the examiners. So in this this is a schematic representation. We know that this is the first cleavage division. Then we have the 2-cell stage. Then we have the 4-cell. Then we have the 8-cell. Then we have the 16-cell, or we call it morula. So in all these sections, we can see that the zona pellucida is a constant thing. It is these cells are actually covered by zona pellucida. So you have to have a watch on zona pellucida, because our previous question was which are the structures covered by zona pellucida, right? So till now morula, we have zona pellucida covering the morula as well. Now, what do you mean by blastocyst? This is again a very favorite question for the examiners. So morula again will undergo repeated cell divisions, and what happens? It will be moving into the uterine cavity. So once it reaches the cavity, the uterine milk, the secretions of the uterine glands, will enter into the morula. So this is morula, and the uterine milk will enter into the morula, and it will create a space filled with the uterine milk. So this cavity is known as blastocoele. So this cavity is known as blastocoele. So what do you mean by blastocyst? So how many cells will be there in blastocyst? You can expect from 32 to 64 cells in a blastocyst. So we can say that blastocyst is nothing but morula with a blastocoele, isn't it? Morula, if it undergoes repeated cell divisions, and if it reaches 30 to 64 cell stage, and if it is having a cavity with uterine milk filled in it, the cavity would we usually call it as blastocoele. Then you can call this as blastocyst. And this blastocyst will be again covered with zona pellucida. So when will this zona pellucida move off? So we know that we have the blastocyst in the uterine cavity. This is covered by zona pellucida. Now, at the time of implantation, say it will start from 6th to 7th day after fertilization. At the time of implantation, this zona pellucida should actually move away, or it should be deshelled, so that the blastocyst can get implanted into the uterine wall. If the zona pellucida is present over the blastocyst, the implantation won't occur. So once the blastocyst is implanted, if you have a look at the blastocyst, you won't be seeing the zona pellucida. So that was the answer for our question. So you will be seeing the zona pellucida till the stage of blastocyst. It will be covering the blastocyst, but before implantation, the zona pellucida should move off, so that the blastocyst will stick onto the uterine wall. So in the implanted blastocyst, you won't be seeing the zona pellucida. That was our answer. And this process of moving away, deshelling the zona pellucida is known as zona hatching. Now we will see what are the events occurring in the first week. So changes after the implantation. So implantation usually occurs at the polar trophoblast. So what happens is you have the morula, have the blastocyst, and in this have the outer cell mass, and you have the inner cell mass. Okay, so outer cell mass is known as trophoblast, which is actually giving rise to the formation of placenta, and the cells which are arranged inner to it is known as embryoblast. So embryoblast means these are the cells which are giving rise to the formation of embryo. So this is how the cells are arranged within the blastocyst. Now, what do we mean by polar trophoblast? Polar trophoblast means the point of trophoblast which is entering into the uterine endometrium, and it is this point which will be carrying the embryoblast, because we know that the embryoblast is having an eccentric position, right? So it's not lying in the middle. With the formation of the blastocoele, the fluid in the blastocoele will push the embryoblast to one point, and the embryoblast will be seen as an eccentric thing. So the trophoblast covering this embryoblast will be called polar trophoblast, and it is this polar trophoblast which will be invading into the uterine endometrium. So when we talk about endometrium, this is the whole thickness of the endometrium. We have three layers: stratum compactum, we have the stratum spongiosum, and we have the stratum basale. These are the three layers: stratum compactum, then you have the stratum spongiosum, and then we have the stratum basale. So these are the three layers in the first two layers, the stratum compactum mainly, and to some extent spongiosum as well. It is made possible by the proteolytic action of the trophoblast. It will release trypsin-like enzymes, and that will help to invade the endometrium. Now, the implantation or embedding happens 6th or 7th day after fertilization, and it will be completed, say, roughly after 12 days of fertilization. And the implantation site, where will it get implanted? So previously it was said that it is usually getting implanted at the junction of the fundus and posterior wall of the body of uterus. But recent studies are considering implantation anywhere in the upper segment as normal. Upper segment of the uterine cavity, if it is getting implanted, it is considered as normal. Anywhere else other than the upper segment, it is considered as abnormal, and you call it as ectopic pregnancy. So let's see what are the other sites of ectopic pregnancy. So this region is our upper segment. So anywhere in the upper segment, you call it as normal implantation. And anywhere other than this, you call it as abnormal implantation or ectopic pregnancy. So it can be, it can get implanted in the uterine tube. It can get implanted in the ovary. It can get implanted in the mesentery, abdominal cavity, or sometimes within the uterine cavity in the lower segment. It can get implanted in the internal os, or it can get implanted in the cervical region. So all these are considered as ectopic pregnancies. So what do you mean by placenta previa? So ectopic pregnancy is again a short note for most of the university exams. Then you will get a short note on placenta previa. So what do you mean by placenta previa? If the implantation, so if this is a uterine cavity, you can consider this as the upper segment and this as the lower segment. If the implantation occurs in the lower uterine segment, you call that condition as placenta previa. And it is actually graded into 4. There are mainly 4 grades for the placenta previa: grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4, depending upon the position of placenta. So grade 1, we can see that it is within the lower segment, but it is not reaching towards the os. In the grade 2, we can see that it is in the lower segment. It is reaching towards the os, towards the internal os. In grade, we can see that it is in the lower segment and is covering the os, but the peculiarity here is once the os is dilated, it will move away. That is the peculiarity of grade 3 placenta previa. And in grade 4, it completely covers the internal os, even if it is dilated. So that is the difference between grade 3 and grade 4. In grade 3, it will move away once there is a dilatation for the internal os, but in grade 4, it will completely cover the internal os, even if the os is dilated. So placenta previa, again a short note, favorite short note. So, so the changes in the first week means from the point of fertilization till the point of implantation. The changes happening in the second week. So what are the changes happening in the second week? So it starts with completed implantation. By 12th day, the implantation will be completed. And the penetration site, this was our penetration site, the site through which our blastocyst entered into the endometrium. That site will be actually closed by the fibrin plug. Now let's have a look at the embryoblast. This was our embryoblast. It is actually getting converted into 2 layers of cells. This is known as our bilaminar germ disc. And now you can name the 2 layers as epiblast in the upper part and the hypoblast in the lower part. Now, along with, so these are the embryoplastic structures, the structures derived from the embryoblast. Now, which are the other structures developed along with this, other than the embryonic structures? So you can call it as extra embryonic structures. One is the amniotic cavity. So above the epiblast, a cavity is formed that is known as the amniotic cavity. You can see a yolk sac, a cavity developed below that is known as yolk sac. Then you have the formation of amnion. Amnion is actually the cells lining the amniotic cavity. Then you have the primary villus. So this is the trophoblast, right? So trophoblast is actually getting differentiated into an inner cytotrophoblast. This is known as the cytotrophoblast. And the outer blue colored is known as syncytiotrophoblast. Okay, so the cytotrophoblast will form a villi-like projection that is known as primary villus. Don't worry, we'll discuss about the placenta in detail in the coming sessions. So the primary villus is again formed during the second week. Now, another important structure formed during this period is the formation of chorion. So what do you mean by chorion? So again, chorion can be asked as a short note. So we mentioned about the embryoblast here. We have the 2 layers of embryoblast. Then we have the amnion covering the amniotic cavity. Then you have the yolk sac down. Then you have the cytotrophoblast and syncytial trophoblast. This purple colored structure we didn't mention, right? So there is a structure lying between the embryoblast and the trophoblast. This is known as extraembryonic mesoderm. Okay, the extraembryonic mesoderm. And you can see a cavity developed within the extraembryonic mesoderm. That cavity is known as extraembryonic coelom or the chorionic cavity. So with the formation of this cavity, we can see that the mesoderm is actually divided into 2 types. This is known as somatopleuric, the one covering the amniotic cavity and the one lining the inner aspect of the cytotrophoblast. You call it a somatopleuric extraembryonic mesoderm. And the one covering the yolk sac, you call it as splanchnopluric extraembryonic mesoderm. So what do you mean by chorion? Chorion is trophoblast along with this somatopleuric extraembryonic mesoderm. You have to have a clear idea about this so that it will be easy for you to understand the development of placenta. Now, we have, with the formation of this extraembryonic mesoderm, we can see that the amnion is actually getting bilayered because you have the amnion with the underlying extraembryonic mesoderm, the somatopleuric. Then you have the yolk sac again becoming bilayered. That is, we have the lining of the yolk sac along with the extraembryonic mesoderm. Then you have the chorion again bilayered with the lining of the extraembryonic mesoderm. So all these structures are becoming 2-layered structures with the formation of extraembryonic mesoderm. Now, another important thing is the amnion, the yolk sac, both are having, 2 layers. What I would like to make this point is this is known as extraembryonic ectoderm. Some of the books you will come across this term, extraembryonic endoderm. So these are nothing but, since this is actually forming, the epiblast is actually forming the ectoderm, the continuation of those cells which are lying outside the embryo, you call it as extraembryonic ectoderm. So, likewise, the hypoblast cells are actually giving rise to the endoderm, right? So the cells arising from these and which are lining the yolk sac, we call extraembryonic because it's lying outside the embryo and extraembryonic endoderm. And along with the mesoderm, you have the lining. So this is a schematic representation again of the implanted blastocyst showing this is the bilaminar germ disc. You can see the 2 cavities, amniotic cavity and yolk sac. We can see the chorionic cavity formed, and we can, one more event which is occurring here is, you can see that the yolk sac is actually, a part of the yolk sac is actually getting pinched off and getting separated from the main yolk sac, so that we have the formation of definitive yolk sac. So in the initial period, we have the primary yolk sac, and when a part of the primary yolk sac is pinched off, then the yolk sac which we get is known as the definitive yolk sac. So when you're asked to write a short note about yolk sac, we have to start with the formation of yolk sac and the formation of the primary yolk sac and the formation of definitive yolk sac, secondary or definitive yolk sac. Again, yolk sac is also a favorite question. Now, the blastocyst after implantation is actually lying mainly in the stratum compactum, and the endometrium and the surrounding the conceptus and the lining the uterine cavity will be now named in a different way. So till now we were calling it as endometrium, stratum compactum. So after implantation, the same endometrial lining will be given different names according to the position of implanted zygote. So let's see what are the names given to that. The first one is decidua basalis. So it is the point where you have the embryonic pole of the blastocyst. Okay, so the blastocyst is here. So the endometrium in relation with the embryonic pole of the blastocyst is known as decidua basalis. Now, what do you mean by decidua capsularis? So the remaining part of the blastocyst, you can call it as embryonic pole. So the embryonic pole is the pole which is first getting attached during implantation, and the endometrium lying in close relation, you can decidua basalis. The remaining part which is covered by the endometrium. That endometrium you call it as decidua capsularis, and the next one is decidua parietalis. So decidua parietalis will be the endometrium lining the remaining uterine cavity. That is known as decidua parietalis. So it is just a renaming of the endometrium after the implantation. So this is the uterine cavity. Say roughly about 14 to 16 weeks. The uterine cavity will be actually obliterated by the fusion of, this is the decidua capsularis and this is decidua parietalis. So these two layers will get fused and finally you won't be seeing this uterine cavity, say roughly 14 to 16 weeks after fertilization. So some summary of the events happening in the second week, we can remember it by the rule of 2. We have seen the embryoblast forming the two layers, epiblast and hypoblast, getting into cytotrophoblast and syncytial trophoblast. We have seen the formation of two yolk sacs, primary and secondary yolk sac. We have seen the two cavities formed, the amniotic cavity and the chorionic cavity. We have seen the formation of extraembryonic, differentiation of extraembryonic mesoderm into somatopleuric and splanchnopluric extraembryonic mesoderm. And we have seen the formation of two layers for the amnion, for the yolk sac, and for the chorion. So two layers are formed for all these three structures. So at this point, I would like to discuss about hydatid molar pregnancy. So again, it is a very favorite short note. There are mainly two types. One is complete and the other one is partial. The major difference which you have to see between the two is in complete hydatidiform mole, it will be the trophoblast alone. You won't be getting any fetal part in it. And the ovum will be empty in complete mole. But in partial mole, the ovum will be having a haploid set of chromosomes. That is the first difference. So even when ovum being empty, you are having the trophoblast, means the development of trophoblast is purely under control of the paternal genes, right? And these are the two different types of hydatidiform moles, the complete mole and the partial mole. You can read about it in detail because this is a favorite question. Due to time constraints, I'm not moving into the details of it. Priyanka, let's have a question.
Yeah, here it is on your screens. We have 30 seconds time for this. Here are the results of the polling.
Very good, because straight question, because we haven't mentioned anything about the intraembryonic mesoderm, right? We just discussed about the events occurring till second week and we haven't mentioned intraembryonic mesoderm. So that was a straight question indeed. Okay, let's move on with the session. So now we are moving on to the third week. Third week, the main event happening is known as gastrulation. So what is happening during gastrulation? We have the bilaminar germ disc getting converted into trilaminar germ disc. So 3 germ layers are formed in third week. We can remember it like that, 3 germ layers in third week. So that process of formation of intraembryonic mesoderm. So these are the intraembryonic mesoderm cells between the epiblast and hypoblast, right? So this process is known as gastrulation and it is happening in the third week of intrauterine period. Now, another important event happening is the formation of primitive streak. So on the 15th day roughly, we have the disc forming a cranial end. This is the cranial end and this is the caudal end of the disc. So at the caudal end, we have the formation of primitive streak. And this primitive streak is actually considered as a primary organizer because it is after the formation of this primitive streak, we have the formation of the many structures like the notochord, intraembryonic mesoderm, formation of endoderm, ectoderm, and all. Okay. So we have, now let's see the parts of the primitive streak. Again, primitive streak is a favorite question. So it has got a cephalic end that is known as the primitive node or Henson's node, and there's a pit within it that is known as primitive pit, and there's a groove extending till the caudal end that is known as the primitive groove. And it is happening on the epiblast, isn't it? And from the primitive streak through the primitive pit, we have the cells invading between the epiblast and hypoblast. Another important event happening during this period is the formation of notochord. So notochord, again, it is a midline structure. So this is actually, if you have the disc like this, you are taking a section through the middle, and if you are viewing from this side, you're removing this part and you're viewing the section from this side. This is the view. Okay, so this is here you get the primitive streak. Like this is the cephalic end, and this is the caudal end of the primitive streak. So this is the primitive streak here. So the cells will actually invade through the midline, and this is our notochord, which is lying in the midline. Now there are many steps in the formation of notochord. I'm not going into the details. You have to memorize all these steps because you need to know the sequence of events happening in the formation of notochord as well. Another important event occurring here is allantoic diverticulum. So this is our yolk sac. This is our yolk sac, and this is a diverticulum projecting from the yolk sac into the from the caudal end of the umbilical vesicle. So that diverticulum is known as the endodermal diverticulum, and it usually happens by 16th day of development. The role of this allantois or allantoenteric diverticulum or allantoic diverticulum is to vascularize the chorion. So the umbilical vessels or the allantoic vessels are actually formed after the formation of the allantoic diverticulum. So allantois is also a favorite short note. Now, apart from all these structures, there are some other regions getting differentiated in the embryonic disc. So one is precaudal plate. We know that there is intraembryonic mesoderm, but the intraembryonic mesoderm is not invaginating between the ectoderm and endoderm at two regions. One region is known as precaudal plate. This is a circular region, or otherwise known as primordium of oropharyngeal membrane. And this is a region where the intraembryonic mesoderm is not going between the ectoderm and endoderm. Another region like this, seen at the caudal end, is known as the cloacal membrane. That is actually, this is a primitive streak, and caudal to the primitive streak, we have the cloacal membrane form, which is the dividing into anal and urogenital membranes. Then you have the pericardial bar. Pericardial bar is actually a horseshoe-shaped intraembryonic mesoderm cranial to the buccopharyngeal membrane. This is the buccopharyngeal membrane. So cranial to it, we have a horseshoe-shaped structure, that is the pericardial bar. This is actually an anomaly known as caudal dysgenesis syndrome or mermaid syndrome, because the legs of the fetus is looking like a mermaid's tail, isn't it? So this is actually due to defective invasion of the intraembryonic mesoderm to the caudal part of the embryonic disc. So that is known as sirenomelia or mermaid syndrome or caudal dysgenesis syndrome. So all these are again seen as MCQs in entrance examinations. So Priyanka, can we have the next question? You are seeing a photograph.
Here is the polling. Five more seconds. Here are the results.
Yes, the answer is it is not the remnant of notochord, because the remnant of notochord are seen in two forms, mainly nucleus pulposus as well as the apical ligament of Tenz. It is actually the remnant of primitive streak. It is remaining there itself without getting degenerated. That will result in this tumor, and that tumor is known as sacrococcygeal teratoma. So sacrococcygeal teratoma, it contains tissues derived from all the three germ layers because it is a primitive streak which is giving rise to all the three layers ultimately, right? Then it is more commonly seen in female newborns. It is benign and is said to have good prognosis, but it is not the remnant of notochord, but the remnant of primitive streak. Now, let's move on to the next slide.
Yes, we can move on to the next slide now.
Now let's see what are the changes happening from 4th to 8th week. So 4th to 8th week, we witness the differentiation of the intra-embryonic mesoderm. So those who are finding it difficult, I have done detailed sessions on these topics in my YouTube channel. You can go and watch. Those who have already finished studying, this will be a quick recap for you. So the intra-embryonic mesoderm, which is lying between the ectoderm and the endoderm, are actually further subdivided into paraxial mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm, and the lateral plate mesoderm. So the one is paraxial, on either side of the axis. Then we have the intermediate, and the third group is known as the lateral plate mesoderm. So the paraxial mesoderm is the mesoderm from which we have the formation of somites. You have to remember that. So intraembryonic mesoderm, the derivatives of intraembryonic mesoderm, again a favorite question. So let's see how the intraembryonic mesoderm is seen within the developing embryo. So you have the ectoderm, you have the endoderm. This region is known as the intraembryonic mesoderm. So on either side of the notochord, we have the paraxial mesoderm, which is giving rise to somites. Then we have the intermediate, and lateral to it, we have the lateral plate mesoderm. So something about somite. During the formation of somite, the period we usually refer to as somite period, and it is usually the 4th week. And roughly, we get 44 pairs of somites formed. And the first somites to form are the occipital somites, roughly 4 to 5 pairs in the region of skull, which will result in the formation of skull. Now, the parts, the somite can be divided into a dorsolateral part and a ventromedial part. This will be easy for you in order to study the derivatives of somites. And we are not moving on to the derivatives, but you have to remember the somites are arranged on either side of the notochord and they're derived from the paraxial mesoderm. And we will see the derivatives later. Now, in the lateral plate mesoderm, so we have the paraxial mesoderm on either side of the notochord, then we have the intermediate mesoderm, and towards the lateral aspect, we have the lateral plate mesoderm. So there is a cavity formed in the lateral plate mesoderm which divides the lateral plate mesoderm into again a somatopleuric layer and a splanchnopluric layer, similar to our extraembryonic mesoderm. When we mentioned about extraembryonic mesoderm, we discussed it as somatopleuric and splanchnopluric based on the development of extraembryonic coelom. Likewise, the intraembryonic mesoderm is also, the lateral plate of intraembryonic mesoderm is also getting converted into somatopleuric and splanchnopluric with the formation of intraembryonic coelom. What I wanted to mention is about the intraembryonic coelom is it is giving rise to the major cavities in the body. It is giving rise to the pericardial cavity, the pleural cavity, and the peritoneal cavity. That is the important conclusion of the intraembryonic coelom. These are the 3 important derivatives of intraembryonic coelom. So first, you will be seeing the cavities like this, and the cavities are separated by the pericardial and pleural cavity are separated by the pleuropericardial membrane, and the pleural cavity and peritoneal cavity will be separated by pleuroperitoneal membrane. And later what happens is with the lateral folding of the embryo, these 2 cavities, the peritoneal cavities, will come and merge in the middle, so that ultimately in the adults you will get only one single peritoneal cavity.
Hello.
And pardon? And what happens is we have the lungs, we have the heart, and we have the abdominal organs invading into the pericardial cavity, pleural cavity, and peritoneal cavity. So it's not inside the cavities, but it is actually enclosed by these cavities. That is one of the important things I would like to convey, because most of us believe that the heart is inside the pericardial cavity, lung is inside the pleural cavity. No, it's not like that. We have the cavities, the closed cavities first formed, and these organs are actually invading, so that if this is the organ, we have the cavity enclosing it, the closed cavity enclosing it. So the organ is not within the cavity. That is a very important concept to know, because most of the students, when asked, will say the heart is seen inside the pericardial cavity. So it is not inside the pericardial cavity. Now, simultaneously, we have the neural tube formation from the ectoderm. This region lying over the notochord is known as neurectoderm. It will actually fold on itself to form the neural tube. And the junction is known as, is actually giving rise to a mass of cells known as neural crest cells. So, neural crest cells, formation of neural tube, all these are again favorite questions. So this diagram will actually give a clear idea about the derivatives of all germ layers in just one glance. We can see the embryoblast, we have the epiblast, we have the trilaminar germ disc. Then after that, we can see there are three structures mainly formed: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Endoderm is mainly giving rise to the GIT and the respiratory system. The ectoderm is further dividing into surface ectoderm and neurectoderm. Surface ectoderm will be giving rise to skin, hair, and nails, whereas neurectoderm will be giving rise to the neural crest cells and neural tube. Now the mesoderm is actually dividing into, we have already seen, the paraxial mesoderm will be giving rise to somites, and that will be giving rise to the skeletal framework and the muscles. Then intermediate mesoderm will be giving rise to the urogenital system, and the lateral plate mesoderm will be giving rise to the connective tissue and muscles of the viscera. So this diagram, if you have a look, it will be easy for you to just say in a nutshell about the derivatives of the three germ layers. And this diagram, can you identify the condition? It's already given there. It is known, this condition is known as anencephaly. Anencephaly means when we talk about the neural tube formation, it is in the form of a tube with two ends open, right? So the opening at the, so if this is the neural tube, the opening at the cranial end, you call it as anterior neuropore, and the opening at the caudal end, you call it as posterior neuropore. If this is not getting closed during the formation of central nervous system, that will result in the formation of anencephaly. So you can read more about anencephaly because it can also be asked as a short note. So these are some of the important university short questions which I have come across, because some of you have asked me to share some of the important questions coming from this general embryology part. So what I felt is, all these questions like intraembryonal mesoderm, primitive streak, decidua, fertilization and effects of fertilization, zona pellucida, notochord, spermatogenesis, permeogenesis, oogenesis, neural crest cells, somites, yolk sac, all these things can come as a short note. And apart from the other topics which I have mentioned in between the slides. So please go through all these topics in detail before the exams. Hope you had a good session. And please leave your comments in the feedback session so that in the coming sessions, I can make it better. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, Kritika, please.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to thank Dr. Rose here. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an amazing and insightful session. We could see a lot of thank you notes for you in the chat session, and we have almost around 100 plus questions in our Q&A. So this is for everybody's notice that we will be addressing the important questions in our next session, which is scheduled for 8th of June. And so please be there, and your all the queries, most of the queries will be addressed by the author before starting the next session on 8th.
Yeah, just for this session, there are a couple of feedback questions which we are going to flash on your screen right now so that we can make it better for you, for all of you. So here is the first question.
Request you all to please answer these so that we can include these feedback for our upcoming sessions.
So more you will participate, better we will be prepared to tackle these sessions as per your requirements. So your feedback is very crucial to us, and Dr. Rose is going to maneuver her pitch in her next sessions as she sees, the desire of this particular quorum. So I will now share the results for you, Dr. Rose, and I think all of us agree that we like the same format, so I think we are fine. As you can see that 52% of our participants, attendees today want the same format to continue.
Okay, so we'll follow the same format in the coming sessions as well.
There is one more question for you so that you can share your feedback. And here is the question. And here is the feedback. Dr. Rose, so I think everybody agrees, most of us agree that the content that you've packed in one session is perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
So with this, we would like to end today's session. We will start next session with the Q&A, and we would be happy to see all of you again with us on 8th of June at 4:30 p.m. for the next masterclass by Dr. Rose, and she will continue from where we have left today. And with that, I would just like to thank everybody and a wonderful good evening and a weekend. Over to you, Dr. Rose, some parting words.
Okay, thank you so much. So keep watching my YouTube channel, and hoping to meet you soon in the second session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.